Hello and welcome to today's webinar on baking evaluation, sensory analysis, and nutritional characteristics of modern, heritage, and ancient wheat varieties. This is Alice Formiga, and I'm the webinar coordinator with eOrganic. eOrganic is the organic agriculture community of practice with eExtension. You can find all of our published articles, videos, and our many upcoming and recorded webinars on organic farming and research topics on our website at the link on your screen. Before we begin, I would like to give you a very quick rundown on how today's webinar will work. The presentation will last about 45 minutes, and then after that we'll have time for your questions. We'll be reading the questions out loud after the presentation is over, and we will answer as many as we have time for. Today we're very glad to welcome a team of collaborators on the Value-Added Grains for Local and Regional Food Systems NIFA OREI project. We've had several other webinars from other members of the project team, which are available in our archive. I'm going to very briefly introduce our speakers. Julie Dawson of the University of Wisconsin conducts research and extension to support urban and regional food systems with an emphasis on small-scale diversified farms, market gardens, and community gardens. Lisa Kucek is a graduate student at Cornell University. She collaborates with organic farmers to breed new genotypes of wheat, spelt, emmer, and einkorn for the Northeast United States. Abdullah Jaradat is the supervisory agronomist and research leader working at the Agricultural Research Service in Morris, Minnesota. He is a wheat geneticist specializing in hulled wheat species and wheat land races of the Fertile Crescent. So with that, I'm going to hand the screen control over to our first speaker, Julie, and then I'll also pull up the PDF. So one moment, please.
Hi everyone, thanks for attending. I am going to talk primarily about the bread making quality and pasta making quality evaluation component of this project, and then Lisa will talk about sensory and flavor evaluation. This was done while I was at Cornell, and I've continued to be involved even though I'm now at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So it is part of the Value-Added Grains for Local and Regional Food Systems project, which is funded by the Organic Research and Education Initiative, as Alice said. We are working on bread wheat, including modern and historic wheats, soft wheat, emmer, einkorn, and spelt. I will be covering primarily the bread wheat quality evaluation. The soft wheat quality evaluation was done and will be published later. We've also done agronomic trials and evaluated a number of different varieties for organic conditions, and that was the subject of a previous webinar, as was more information on the ancient grains and on dehulling. First, I'd like to thank everyone that made this possible. We really couldn't have done it without a team of bakers who came together to evaluate different wheat varieties, and also a group of chefs in New York City that came together to evaluate emmer varieties for pasta making, and also all of the people that have been involved in this project to coordinate the agronomic trials, the baking analysis, and the sensory analysis. Our evaluation process started with variety trials to get agronomic data on these different varieties, and then we sent varieties to be analyzed by the University of Vermont for protein and falling number, which are important for baking quality, and also for vomitoxin, which we wanted to make sure that none of the wheat varieties we were testing exceeded the safe levels of vomitoxin. So we screened them for that. Falling number is associated, it's a measure of sprouting, and so wheat that has sprouted in the field is usually not good for baking, and so we eliminated varieties with very low falling number. And then we tried to capture a sample of wheat varieties that represented both modern and historic wheats, winter wheats, and spring wheats, and a range of protein values. We chose 7 varieties in total and had 8 artisanal bakers evaluate these for technical quality through a day-long, well, it started the day before with the sourdough starter makeup, and then a full day of baking where they were all working together to evaluate the varieties. And then the bread that they made was evaluated by a sensory panel, which Lisa will talk about. The baking evaluation we did at Wide Awake Bakery in Ithaca, New York on a very lovely January morning. Jeffrey Hamelman from King Arthur Flour led the evaluation process. He has a lot of experience working with artisanal bread making, evaluation of local wheats, and evaluation of whole grain flours. We had 8 professional bakers, and they all worked together with the same process, the same starting recipe for each variety, and then decisions made about hydration, rest time, based on how the variety was responding. So it was a consensus process among the bakers for the exact way each variety was treated, and the idea was to give each variety the best chance of making a good loaf of bread, which is in some sense the opposite of what often happens in technical evaluation of bread making quality, where wheat varieties are put through a very standardized process and have to make a certain quality threshold in order to be considered high-quality bread wheats. This was a much more flexible process. The bakers were interested in how well the wheats could make bread, what the flavor characteristics were, and they each went through each step of the baking process and individually scored each of the 7 wheat varieties. So all the way through mixing, proofing, shaping, baking. There was discussion among the bakers about what the different metrics meant, what was a 1, what was a 10, but each one scored each variety individually. So we had scores from 1 to 10 for all the varieties from the bakers, with 10 being the best quality and 1 being the worst quality. I'm going to show the results from the spring and winter wheat varieties separately because they're really more comparable among spring wheats and among winter wheats. But they each use the same rating scale. So you can see on the x-axis the different phases of bread making. So you have the start with the mixing, going through the proof phase, the loaf once it came out of the oven. So in the middle is kind of where the bake happens. Then the evaluation of the final loaf, exterior, interior, and the flavor. And then the scores are from 1 to 10. We have 3 spring wheat varieties. Tom is a modern hard red spring. Red Fife is a historic spring wheat. And Glen is a modern but an older hard red spring wheat. And basically the bakers felt like all of these made good loaves of bread. Technically speaking, they were very similar. Tom and Glen were probably slightly better than Red Fife, but not appreciably better, and the bakers really felt like all 3 of these made very good loaves of bread. The winter wheats were slightly lower on the ranking. As can be expected, the spring wheats had higher protein, which usually makes the baking process a little easier, but the bakers felt like even with this lower protein content, these all also made very acceptable loaves of bread, with the exception of Frederick, which is the lower line on this chart, which was much more difficult to work with. So on this graph, Appalachian White is a modern hard white winter wheat. It's a variety of wheat that has a white grain coat, seed coat, rather than a red, which gives whole wheat flour a slightly milder flavor. So we wanted to try it since it's a fairly new market class. Warthog is another modern hard red winter wheat, and Flocaster and Frederick are historic wheats. Here again, the bakers felt like if they had an opportunity to experiment with these and to really work with them, everything except Frederick would make a very good loaf of bread. And what they were interested in was the perception at the end of quality from the consumer's point of view. So the flavor, they felt like they could work with most of these wheats if the quality was there in the end. And that's what Lisa will talk about. It also was clear that the baker's skill in the process was very influential in how well these wheats would perform. With a skilled baker, almost any wheat variety can make a good loaf of bread. Some are easier to work with than others, so the spring wheats were definitely easier to work with than the winter wheats. So I'm going to switch now and talk about the Emmer evaluation. We had a fairly similar process to decide on Emmer varieties. We had different Emmer varieties under organic management that we screened for agronomic traits. Then we analyzed them for quality traits, protein following number and vomitoxin to make sure that the varieties we were using for the sensory analysis were low enough in vomitoxin that they wouldn't pose any risk. We had 4 varieties with enough quantity and good vomitoxin numbers to assess them for pasta making quality, and then we did a sensory evaluation, which Lisa will talk about. The pasta making evaluation was slightly different than the bread making evaluation because pasta is made using a machine that takes a fairly skilled operator, a chef that knows what they are doing, to easily roll out the pasta and evaluate the quality of the grain for pasta making. So we had one chef that was primarily responsible for the pasta making, Juan, who's in the photos here, and other chefs commenting on the performance of the varieties. We had 4 varieties of emmer. Red Vernal, Lucille, and North Dakota Common are available, I believe, commercially for farmers to grow. And then a black bloomed emmer, which is a newer variety, well, it's a landrace, but newer to the northeast, that's doing well agronomically, and we wanted to include it in the quality evaluation, although we didn't have enough flour to include it in the sensory evaluation. And the results from this showed that Red Vernal and Lucille are both high quality based on the chef's evaluation for making pasta. Red Vernal was slightly less technically accessible than Lucille, but had better flavor for pasta according to the chef, and we'll see the flavor results later. But they both were easy to work with from a technical point of view. North Dakota Common was slightly harder to work with. It had tackier dough and took a lot more time on the machine, which when you're running a restaurant is a big consideration because everything has to be very efficient in order to get things out to customers, and they don't have much space or much time to work with. And the black bloom emmer, while it was promising agronomically, it still needs some adaptation in order to make pasta in this method. There may be other methods of making pasta where it would perform very well, but in this method it was much harder to work with. It took a lot more time because it would tear through the machine. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, who will tell you about the bread sensory evaluation and the emmer sensory evaluation.
Okay. So I am going to continue where Julie left off and speak about once we had worked with bakers and made these loaves that each represented a unique wheat variety, how did they taste to a panel of representative consumers? So here we have a chart that I'm going to fill out piece by piece to guide us through the process of identifying varieties for a local and regional food system. So we first had 7 varieties that we identified, as Julie described, that are a variety of different market classes and different ages of release, including heritage and modern varieties, and spring and winter wheat varieties, and red and white and soft and hard wheats. And then they were grown in organic fields for 3 years at 3 different sites, and yield and then test weight, which is another measure of quality, and milling parameters on these wheats was recorded over those years. And so blue boxes here show varieties that are performing well in that particular category. So for example, Tom and Warthog are excellent yielding varieties that also have great test weight in the field. But we want to see how they do throughout the rest of the process of making bread, in addition to how that bread tastes from consumers. So moving on, this is the range of protein that we saw in these different varieties from the material that we used. And we used material from 2 different years and 2 different sites to try to get a better representation of this material overall. And Tom and Glenn had very high protein, as did Red Fife, as springs generally do, and the winters had lower protein, which is why overall their baking score was probably lower for the winter wheats. So as Julie described, this baking score here, it shows the overall average from every component of the baking process that Julie identified in that chart, overall how they scored. And so we can see Tom and Glenn were our top scorers, and Frederick and Appalachian White were significantly lower than those. But as Julie described, the bakers said they would be willing to work with almost all those varieties other than Frederick. So now moving on to bread height was another thing that we looked at, and if you want a loaf that rises really well, Tom and Glenn and Warthog all looked really great for that. So now moving on to sensory attributes, we had 30 individuals that tasted bread made from these unique varieties, and then rated a number of things as they tasted the bread. And they were trained for a day and a half in how to taste this bread and how to evaluate these particular components. So as taste intensity goes, how intense was that particular taste of the bread? Red Fife had a significantly higher taste intensity than Warthog, and that follows some interesting folklore around Red Fife being recognized as having unique flavor. And then as far as texture goes, Glenn had excellent crumb and surface texture. It was very smooth. Crumb texture was very delicate, and Frederick tended to be a lot more hearty and rough in terms of texture of the crumb and of the surface of the bread. And then moving on, after eating a particular slice of bread, individuals counted the amount of seconds for that bread to dissolve in their mouth. And so Glenn kind of hung around a little longer. It didn't dissolve and kind of turn into a mush quickly after eating it. And graininess was quite different between Glenn and Frederick. Glenn was a lot less grainy and Frederick was more grainy. And Glenn was also more moist of the breads evaluated. And then finally, after eating the breads baked from unique varieties, individuals tasted wheat berries. So these are whole grains that were cooked almost like rice and then tasted. And what we think is really interesting is that we see quite a bit of difference. Although Warthog had the lowest taste intensity, and when it was made into a bread, it had the highest taste intensity when eaten as a berry of wheat, just a cooked whole grain. And Appalachian White had the lowest. So now looking back at that sourdough bread, when individuals tasted the bread, they identified specific flavors that they tasted in that bread. And here we have 14 different broad flavor categories that individuals could identify in the bread. And we looked at those among the 7 different varieties of a whole from those 30 different individuals that tasted each bread twice, and were able to see significant differences in the presence of a particular flavor in a bread. And differences among varieties existed for nuttiness in flavor, for yeasty flavor, for bitter flavor, and for earthy flavor. So quite interesting. And you can kind of see that Red Fife square point just moves up quite a bit higher on the earthy aspect there than the rest of the varieties tasted by these individuals. So conclusions for sourdough, what do we know from this? Glenn tended to have a smooth surface texture and delicate crumb, stayed in the mouth longer. It was least grainy and had highest moisture. Red Fife had the highest taste intensity identified and earthier flavors. Tom had the smoothest surface texture and very large air bubbles as well, which might be beneficial for some bakers or might not be important for others. Fullcaster had the second highest air bubble size. Appalachian White had the smallest air bubbles. Warthog had the lowest taste intensity, and it was significantly lower than Red Fife. And then Frederick had the roughest surface texture, the most hearty crumb. It was the grainiest, and it was also the driest of all of the breads evaluated. And so now looking at those cooked whole grains, so apart from tasting the bread, when these 30 tasters evaluated cooked whole grains from unique varieties, they again identified unique flavors that they could perceive in those grains. And among all of the varieties, we saw significant differences among the 7 for nuttiness, sweetness, chocolate flavor, and yeasty flavor. So quite interesting, and dairy as well, which is at the bottom. I can't see it in my screen. I hope you guys can see it in yours. It's quite interesting, and these profiles are different between the cooked whole grains, so when the product is going to be used as a wheat berry versus when it's going to be used as a sourdough bread. So conclusions from cooked whole grain, if you're looking to use a variety for cooked whole grain. Glen was less nutty and less sweet in flavor. Red 5 had nuttier flavors. Tom had nothing notably different from the average of all of the varieties. Fullcaster was nuttier, along with Red 5. Appalachian White had the least intense flavor of all of those evaluated. Warthog had the most intense flavor, which again contrasts very much from the bread evaluation, and it had a sweeter flavor when tasted as a grain and less seedy and grainy flavors. Frederick had a yellower color than the others, and it had more dairy flavors, which is quite unique. So now I'll talk about the emmer. So after these pasta makers made pastas from specific varieties of emmer, how did they taste and how did that pasta turn out? And in addition to that, how the whole grain emmer tasted when cooked in the similar way as wheat berries. And I think emmer is frequently consumed in this way, as often identified as farro in the grocery store. And so it is interesting to evaluate it both as pasta in addition to how it tastes as a cooked whole grain. So I'm going to work through that same chart that I had earlier from field all the way through until taste. And so we had those 3 different varieties that Julie talked about. Although we did evaluate the black emmer, as it's called, in the baking and the pasta evaluation. We did not for the sensory evaluation because it was grown in a different environment, and we didn't think that would be a fair evaluation, and also lacked sufficient material, as Julie described. So all 3 of these varieties were excellent yielders. Their rank is here out of a number of 14 total entries evaluated in 3 years and 3 sites in the Northeast, but they all yielded very well and were quite close to each other. And their test weight, it was similar. North Dakota Common had the best test weight, and then protein did not differ very much among the varieties. They were all rather high, from 13.5 to 15%. And then after tasting the pasta made from these unique varieties, this shows the preference. So instead of looking at taste intensity, the 12 individuals that evaluated these different pastas cooked from unique varieties in 2 replicates rated if they preferred the taste of these particular pastas. And Lucille was the most preferred, and North Dakota Common was the least preferred. And then they looked at the surface of the pasta and looked at the shininess of it. And North Dakota Common tended to be shinier. Red Vernal was more matte. And then the roughness of the exterior of the pasta. And North Dakota Common tended to be quite a bit smoother. And then the graininess of the pasta after eating it, if it was grainy or if it was smooth. And Red Vernal was more grainy than the other 2 varieties. And then pasta firmness, as you chewed it, is it really chewy or is it easier to bite through? And with that, North Dakota Common was provided a lot less resistance and when eating it, and Red Vernal was a lot chewier. And Red Vernal also hung around longer. So after eating it, did it dissolve quickly in the mouth or did it hang around? And Red Vernal tended to persist. And then we're looking at cooked whole grain. So when these unique emmer varieties were were cooked and then eaten, North Dakota Common was the most preferred. And so it's kind of the same thing we saw with the bread, that the least preferred variety, when it was processed into either bread or pasta, is now the most preferred variety for cooked whole grains. So it's quite interesting there. So we have to look at what's our end product before we pick our variety, it seems. And for grain texture, Lucille was quite a bit chewier when eaten as a cooked whole grain. North Dakota Common was a lot chewier than Lucille. And then individuals rated the intensity of flavors, and so these are similar to the 14 we showed earlier, except it's just a smaller amount of identifiers, which
Unmuted.
a little bit more feasible for this particular product. So with these three different varieties, individuals rated from 0 to 10 the intensity of each specific flavor.
Muted.
So in terms of bran, for example, did it have no bran presence, which would be a 0 for that variety, or 10, very, very branny? And we can see that there were significant differences in the presence of bran, the intensity of bran, that North Dakota Common did not have as much bran as the other two. And fresh flavors like cucumber and green apple kind of flavors, after the tasters were trained for how to identify each of these flavors, they identified fewer of those fresh flavors in red vernal than the other two. And earthy, there were more earthy flavors identified in red vernal than the other two. And those are the differences that we saw that were significant. So for pasta conclusions, Lucille was the most preferred of the varieties, and it was less grainy. Red vernal had a matte, so a less shiny surface to the pasta. It was the most grainy, and it had the longest persistence after eating it, and it was the most chewy, and it had an earthier flavor and less fresh flavor. And then North Dakota Common had the least preferred taste. It was shiny and smooth on the surface, less grainy when eaten, and it tended to fall apart when eating it. And there was less bran flavor in North Dakota Common. So now moving on from pasta to cooked whole grains. So when eating this as some would call farro, what was the difference in these varieties? And here is looking at the most prominent flavor identified in the cooked whole grain. And so for North Dakota Common, we can see that that orange line there is a bit different. It tends to have more bran flavors coming out, where Lucille tends to have more nutty and grassy flavors, and red vernal more earthy, bitter flavors happening. And so for cooked whole grain, conclusions on this is Lucille, a reversal completely from the pasta. It had the least preferred taste. It was the least chewy, and the prominent flavors are nutty, wheat, and grassy. Red vernal also had a less preferred taste, and the prominent flavors were earthy, bitter, and wheat. And North Dakota Common had the most preferred taste. It was the chewiest, and the prominent flavors were bran, woody, wheat, and nutty. And that is all as far as sensory goes. So we'll move on to einkorn nutrition.
Thank you, and this is Abdullah Jaradat in Morris, Minnesota. I hope that you can see the slides first. First slide I have here. I would like to take you in a journey something like 10,000 years ago and 10,000 miles away. When the first wheats in the Fertile Crescent brought into cultivation from the wild and domesticated in that part of the world, then spread all over the Mediterranean and Southwest Asia. Then after that, they hybridized with what we call wheatgrass or goat grass, to form another species of wheat, and a third instance where the bread wheat became more popular than the other two. But interestingly enough, during the last approximately 60-70 years, starting in Italy in particular, these wheats are gaining more prominence and importance and being brought back into the nutritional stage, and I'm glad to share some of the information with you about einkorn in particular, and some few ideas about emmer and spelt. Oops. As you can see here, the Fertile Crescent map, I like to describe it as a place between, stuck between a hard place and a rock and a hard place, rather. The rock is the mountains in southern Turkey, northern Syria, all the way to Persia, and the hard place is the Syrian desert. So this piece of land, an arc, and this is why it's called crescent, holds the genetic resources of most of the wheats we enjoy these days after almost 10,000 years of their domestication. As you can see, the wild einkorn wheat distribution intersects with that of wild emmer wheat, which is the progenitor of emmer wheat, the cultivated emmer wheat. And I put here a star where bread wheat originated when emmer wheat, the cultivated emmer wheat, came in contact with another grass called goat grass, agelops, and bread wheat became the most popular wheat and spread all over the world, especially in continental climates. Talking about the climates, both einkorn and emmer are more adapted to the Mediterranean climate, which is characterized by mild rainy winters and hot dry summers, while bread wheat is more adapted to continental climates. After the domestication, it took nature in collaboration with early farmers to solve this equation, if you wish, where the einkorn hybridized with an agelops to produce these are diploids, to produce the tetraploid wheat, then hybridized with another goat grass to produce bread wheat. As almost everybody knows, it took probably extra few thousand years to make a delicious French bread. The domestication, as I mentioned earlier, took probably a couple of thousand years, but the importance of einkorn and by extension emmer and then spelt has what I would like to call genetic memory of between 4,000 and 8,000 years of genetic memory, because they have seen it all, from droughts to high temperatures, low temperatures, abiotic stress, biotic stresses, and this is why they are valuable as sources for genes for adaptation in view of the climate change which is already upon us. I would like first to talk about a part of our project in collaboration with the breeding club in North Dakota. We have 100 einkorn accessions being evaluated for salinity, and I would like to just mention a few words about salinity. Farmers in North Dakota are familiar with what I will be talking about. Salinity is rising as an abiotic stress, and most of the time it is man-made, but aggravated by changing climate and management practices or the inadequate or improper management practices in dealing with the soil and water in dry climates. So salinity was one of the objectives, or evaluation for salinity was one of the objectives for this project. The other one is to look at the adaptation to organic management and low external inputs. And going back in history, as I mentioned earlier, these wheats, einkorn in particular, is adapted to organic management simply because farmers throughout most of, I would say 99% of its history of cultivation was cultivated under what we call traditional organic management. There was no availability of inorganic chemicals, etc. So farmers managed their farms and varieties and selected those to adapt to organic management and low external inputs. And that's very important to remember when we talk about producing on small-scale wheat production, where farmers can produce with little external inputs but with adequate nutritional value and reliable yield. The third objective is to look at grain and protein yield stability over time. Farmers are aware of the fluctuations in yield and, of course, protein yield, and these so-called primitive wheats, einkorn in particular, are have this ability to stabilize grain yield and protein yield because these are not pure genotypes. They are mixtures of genotypes, and they have the ability to compensate for each other. They have a large buffering capacity, and this is one of the most important traits to select for, especially under changing climates. Last year we had a large nursery, including the 100 einkorn wheat varieties. In addition, I brought in some 70 emmers and 60 or so spelt wheats. And the field day last year was a very unique experience for the farming community here, and you can see one of Minnesota farmers inspecting some of the emmer to select for his experiments as well. So to show you the diversity of the 100 einkorn accessions we planted, this is simply three different accessions with different spike shapes, colors, and coloring capacity, and at the end of the season, yielding capacity. The field evaluation, oops, I am moving slides quickly. The field evaluation included early vigor, earliness, heat and moisture stress, and the morphology of the plants in terms of height, spike shape, plant and spike and on colors, the seed shape and color of the seed as well. We looked at the chlorophyll content and the rate of its decline over the season. There were accessions which their green color lasted for at least 2 to 3 weeks after others were harvested, and we evaluated the grain and protein yield. At the laboratory scale, we tested all the varieties or accessions under salinity stress at the germination stage and at the seedling stage, simply because we wanted to see how these accessions would react to increasing salinity content, and we evaluated in the first place the carbon to nitrogen ratio, and we calculated the conversion rate of seed weight into seedling dry weight under salinity, and there was a large level of diversity or variation among these 100 accessions. As for seed composition, we looked at the starch content and composition, especially amylose in relation to what's called or what's known as waxy proteins, in relation to digestibility. And just a brief statement about this. The higher amylose, and as we will see in these some of these accessions, the higher amylose is associated with a lower rate of digestibility. When you eat some of the bread or products of these high amylose grains, you feel full for a long time because of this low digestibility of the amylose. We are looking at the gliadins and the glutenins because of their value in supposedly in the gluten intolerance and the celiac disease, and I'm not going to go into the medical or health issues of these. Then we are now doing the carotenes and the dietary fibers, along with macro and micronutrients, especially the micronutrients, iron, zinc, copper, sulfur, and selenium. The preliminary results so far, we identified accessions with early vigor, short seed filling period, which translates into drought tolerance. Although it was a one-year evaluation, the yield estimates are preliminary, and hopefully this year we will have replicated experiments. But the exciting part of the evaluation is that 45 accessions had more than 19% protein content, and the maximum value we obtained was 24% protein, and 60 accessions of those had less than 65% of starch in their seed. More important is the carbon to nitrogen ratio, which is an indicator of the quality of the seed, is that we have the same 60 accessions had CN ratio ranging between 13.2 and 15.6, which is very good. We already developed a database on the plant spike, seed, and flower color profiles. As I mentioned, we are right now the analysis for 27 macro and micronutrients is ongoing, and the carotene analysis is ongoing. The objective behind that is to correlate the color profiles with the nutrient and carotene contents and develop a selection index or criterion. Back to the protein analysis. When we look at the whole flour in einkorn, it ranged between 17 and 24%, but the endosperm, the protein content ranged between 14 and 22%, with the bran, as you would expect, is higher, and the germ has the highest value, 45 to 48%. As I mentioned earlier, the starch in the whole flour was low as compared with the bread wheat, and it ranged between 60 and 68%, and of which 25 to 28% of amylose, which is the favored part of the, in terms of digestion of starch. The ash content in the seed, which is a summation of the nutrients, ranged between 2.1 to 2.7%. And for the carotenoids, the preliminary results, we have values between 8.9 and 10.3 microgram per gram of dry matter seed. We are looking at the yellow pigment. As I mentioned, we took seed color images, and we are correlating all the constituents with the seed color to develop the selection index or criteria. I plan on doing beta-glucan and compare it with oats, because we are working on oats as well, and more important, the phytates. For those who are not familiar with that, with the phytates, this complex made nutrients unavailable in the seed of grasses, wheat included, for monogastric animals, including humans. And einkorn in particular, with along with the other hulled wheats, at least had 50% less phytates than regular wheat, bread wheat. Therefore, the availability of phosphorus and some of the most important micronutrients, especially iron and zinc and selenium, are more available for humans in these wheats as compared with bread wheat. Think of the environmental issues where a large amount of phosphorus in particular goes into the environment, especially by raising monogastric animals on the farm. Just to give you a quick comparison between the hulled wheats, einkorn, emmer, and spelt with the bread wheat derived from several sources. As you can see, the red figures in the hulled wheats are higher than those for wheat. Similarly, the nutrients, macro and micronutrients, there are many of those in the hulled wheat higher than bread wheat. To conclude this part of the presentation, I would like to say that these wheats fed the people in the old world for thousands of years, and they were of great value, whether it is nutritional value or environmental value. Now they are gaining more and more prominence and recognition. The Italians were the pioneers in doing so, and they developed the emmer under the name farro. And those of you who are familiar with this industry, it's a cottage industry. Small farmers formed cooperatives to produce these high quality grains and sell them as health food at premium prices. If I have more time, and Alice, please let me know, I would like to show a few slides about just to show the einkorn diversity here, the spikes, different shapes and forms and colors.
Unmuted.
The spikelets, the grain, and the flour of some of the samples we worked with, and the bread. And as you see, the sliced bread, how tiny the air bubbles there. I am not going to talk about the quality here, but I wish I can hand you some of the bread I baked myself, and hopefully you will be able to do that and enjoy the taste and nutrition of this kind of bread. The same for emmer. Look at the differences, and as you can see in this slide, the black colored spikes, which a trait which came to this accession from the wild emmer wheat. Some of the wild emmer wheats have very black spikes and awns. And it is one of the most drought-tolerant biotypes, so to speak, in emmer. The spikes, as you see, the different colors and morphology. Seed, spikelets, and flour as well. And the bread, very dense, nutty taste, but great to eat. The spelt, I should have mentioned this. It didn't originate in the Fertile Crescent. It originated in Northern Europe, supposedly through a cross between bread wheat and a form of emmer, and it is more adapted to harsh conditions and low fertility in continental climates with lower temperatures. Very different phenotypes of the spike. Seeds are closely resemble emmer, but a little bigger. And the bread is denser even. And this is, if I may advertise, our field day in July 23rd in Morris, Minnesota. For those who are close by, you are most welcome to come and visit and have the first-hand experience with the plants, the seed, and hopefully there will be bread. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to start our question and answer period in just a moment, and I'm also going to, while we're doing that, go back to some of Lisa's slides, because I know that there were some people that had some trouble seeing the lower portion of that, so I apologize for that. I also wanted to let you know that we recorded this webinar, and you can also find that within the next week and a half or so, and also the other webinars that we have about ancient grains, some of which address more of the issues related to gluten, which I know a couple of people have asked about now. I just wanted to share those links with you. And if you have a general organic farming question that doesn't have to do specifically with this webinar, you're also welcome to use the eExtension Ask an Expert service. So now let's move on to the questions. We've gotten a couple of questions right now on where people can buy organic emmer and einkorn seed.
Well, if I may step in and say that the internet is full of advertisement for not only flour but seed as well, so and products. So just Google either einkorn or emmer or spelt, and you'll find many sites where either farmers and or entrepreneurs are selling these seeds packaged and ready to go.
Okay, does anybody have any specific suggestions or recommendations on that? I'm just curious.
That's one of the questions that comes up the most frequently, I think, and it's very regional in terms of seed availability. I know Elizabeth Dick with the Organic Growers Research and Information Sharing Network has a seed buying club, so she probably has information for the Northeast. And Steve Swinger at North Dakota State works with emmer and einkorn in the Midwest.
Okay, one of our listeners just shared a link to a website called Pick a Carrot, which has links to different websites where you can buy organic seeds. So I'll, as soon as I'm done scrolling through these slides here, just so that people who wanted to see some things on the very bottom of them can see them, I will put that link into the chat box. Okay, so this is a question for Julie. Was the emmer in the pasta trial all dehulled?
Yes. So before you mill it, it needs to be dehulled in order to avoid getting the chaff in with the flour. Dehulling is one of the bottlenecks in getting more of this grain into the food chain. There was one variety in the trial that was free threshing, which we're looking at because it seems to be a promising avenue, although agronomically it may not be as good as some of the hulled emmers. Some dehulling facilities will custom dehull. If you're growing emmer, you may be able to find somebody in your region who has a dehuller. I know there's one in New York and one in North Dakota. And then there are also a few projects that are working on dehulling, and there was a webinar, I believe in 2012 or early 2013 on ancient grains that specifically talked about dehulling.
Okay, yeah, and you can find those in our archive, which is on the link on your screen here. Okay, so speaking of gluten, can you talk a little bit about gluten and why some folks need to avoid it, and also the benefits of using gluten in a bread recipe?
This is Lisa. I just want to let everyone know that I recently published a review that looks through a lot of these questions, and it is available open source online. It's called A Grounded Guide to Gluten, so that is available for your reference. And so the ratio between glutenin and gliadin is quite important for bread baking. So gluten is it describes many different types of proteins that exist within wheat, and certain types of glutenin proteins are quite important for bread making in holding the bread, holding its shape, and in being elastic. So we need to have those good proteins for baking available to make decent bread most of the time. And so that's why it can be difficult to make a lovely French baguette out of einkorn and emmer and spelt that have different ratios of gliadin and gluten and proteins within them. And then different sensitivities exist, and again, that review goes through them in detail to wheat. And so gluten proteins in particular are causative of celiac disease, which affects about 1% of the population, or 1% at least is diagnosed. And there's also wheat allergies that affect about 0.4% of the population, and those are generally to proteins that include gluten, but also others. And there are other sensitivities to wheat that involve non-proteins, that involve actually components called fructans. And so those are kind of the general sensitivities to wheat that exist out there.
Okay, I have a question on where the yield tests were conducted.
The yield tests were done at 4 sites in this project over 3 years. The 4th year is coming out this summer, and I included in the data that I presented there only 3 of those sites that are located in the Northeast. So Pennsylvania and Central New York and Northern New York were those 3 sites. Those were in College Station, in Freeville, New York, and Willsboro, New York, on organic land.
Okay, great, thanks. Let's see, someone is interested in getting more data on the einkorn studies. Can you talk about where this might be available?
It's a great question. We do post our yield trials on the Cornell Small Grains testing website. So you can search in cultivar testing small grains Cornell and find that page. It's under organic, and there it has those 3 years of yield trials and test weight and other agronomic components for spelt, emmer, einkorn, and wheat. So that is available. And then as far as this sensory information goes, we're going to put that in the same place as well. And I will say that also Green Market Grow New York City has some great references on their website as well about these ancient grains.
Okay. Is there any indication as to how the baking characteristics of a wheat variety might vary from growing site to growing site or year to year?
This is Julie.
Answer this question.
Go ahead, Abdullah.
No, please.
Environmental conditions do have an effect on baking quality. Generally, stressful conditions will increase the protein content, and so that often improves the baking quality. We don't have a lot of data on these varieties over multiple years. We blended the same amount of grain from each site year so that each variety had the same ratios so that they would be comparable. But it would be interesting to do a baking trial with wheat grown in single years and see how much variation there was over time. In general, bakers say that batches will change from one year to the next or from one farm to the next, but they can usually adapt and still make a good loaf of bread if they have the time to figure out the recipe.
Okay, Abdullah, did you want to add to that?
One of the most important characteristics of these species, einkorn and emmer in particular, that they are adapted, as I mentioned, to low input agriculture, and they stabilize their protein content as a population. So what I'm looking at is from a plant population point of view, if you have a mixture of genotypes, you will end up with more or less the same protein profiles when you mix the flour and to make bread or any other product from these varieties or accessions, regardless, to some extent, regardless of the environmental conditions. The buffering capacity is there, and it's more visible in these wheats compared to bread wheat.
Right. Most of our wheat varieties, they were pure lines.
Right.
I worked with a group of farmers in France that also did the same thing with bread wheat, land races, and historic varieties. They would mix them, and that would buffer environmental fluctuations from year to year. And most millers on a larger scale blend wheat to buffer those kinds of quality differences.
Okay, we're getting a couple of questions about spelt. First question is, do you know of any spring spelt varieties that are used in the northern USA?
I worked with spelt spring wheats here in northern Minnesota, and if the question is adaptability, they are adapted to northern climates. In fact, they are more tolerant to harsh conditions, low temperatures and higher rainfall or soil moisture than others.
Okay, I guess I'm not sure if the person wanted to know if you know of any specific varieties of spelt that are used in the northern USA.
This is
Again,
Lisa,
I am
and
working with.
Okay.
I wanted to say I'm working with genotypes. Sorry, sorry for the interruption. For populations rather than varieties.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we are testing a number of varieties here. It's just a small subset, but we do have data on those varieties, again, on that Cornell small grains cultivar testing site. So
okay,
you
that
can
sounds
look up
like
their
a good
performance,
thing.
at least in the Northeast and in North Dakota.
Does that have baking variations as well on that site?
No, we actually haven't done any quality analysis with spelt.
Okay.
So it was considered, but we decided to focus on wheat and emmer instead. So sorry, we can't provide that data.
Okay, thanks.
We had two spring spelt varieties, which were CDC Zorba and AC Bavaria, but there are fewer spring spelt varieties than winter spelt varieties. That's certainly true.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Okay, someone wants to know where you source the seeds for these trials, and do you know of any good place to get more than just 1 ounce at a time?
This, Abdullah, the small seed storage or gene bank in Aberdeen, Idaho has thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of accessions, and the website, you can access the information there and select or search for certain entries and qualities. Then the gene bank would send you either 100 seed or a couple of grams to start with, and it's very easy to increase these seeds. And we started with doing this, in fact, with 100 seeds.
Okay, can you tell us the name of that one?
I want to clarify, though, Abdullah, the gene banks are specifically providing resources for for research, though, right? This
For
isn't a source that farmers should go to get seed for their farms. Is that correct?
In
Farmers
fact, it
can
is also
access
for
it.
farmers. No farmers can have the access to these seeds simply because it is paid for by taxpayers.
Right, they'll give you a small sample and they would like you to give them some feedback on how it performed.
Right, right.
But it's open to everybody. The question about getting larger quantities is harder because that is something that often comes up as a question, and there are no companies selling large quantities right now, although there's a lot of interest in getting more buyers clubs or communication about farmer-grown seed. So again, Elizabeth Dick in the Northeast and Steve Zwinger in the Midwest are the two people I know that probably have the most information on seed availability, and hopefully we'll put together a directory or a list at some point with these different grain projects so that farmers can find seed more easily.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interest based on all the questions I'm getting. So let's see. Are there any variety? Let's see. Okay. Are there any varieties that you know of emmer and einkorn that are adapted to growing conditions in the Mid-Atlantic, or are they all adapted to the Mid-Atlantic?
We do have Pennsylvania. In central Pennsylvania is one of the sites.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably the closest that we get.
Okay.
It would be interesting if somebody wanted to do a trial.
Okay, great. Is there a plan with Cornell's studies to make the seeds available on the commercial market?
That's a good question. There's a number of fronts on that. Cornell is working with the New York Seed Improvement Program to make a red fife that's been selected to be more true to the initial red fife description from the early 1900s with the USDA available to farmers, and that's quality seed, so it wouldn't be, you know, carrying weed seed or be infected with other diseases in it, but that isn't available yet. But yes, there are plans. And as far as other seed, I think, again, Elizabeth Dick with Ogren is kind of leading that charge to increase the seed availability for different farmers. Yeah.
Okay, I guess somebody just wanted you to repeat the name of the city in Idaho where that gene bank is located.
Aberdeen.
Aberdeen. Oh, okay,
Idaho.
thank you. Yeah, Aberdeen. Okay, great. All right. Can the speakers comment on foliar diseases on the different hulled wheat relative to adapted wheat cultivars?
Well, generally speaking, the hulled wheats are a little bit more tolerant to foliar diseases simply because of their genetic diversity within population genetic diversity. Although I noticed under different environmental conditions, not here in Morris, Minnesota, that they were infected by leaf rust, stem rust, yellow rust, but not at the same level as you see in regular wheat.
Okay, how about scab?
I haven't noticed this in my experiments here. In fact, the Cereal Research Lab is either is using or interested in using some of these hulled wheats or primitive wheats as sources for fusarium head blight.
This is Lisa. I'll just say when we did our vomitoxin testing on the wheats and these, I think we tested 5 different emmer varieties. A number of site years had too high of levels to be included in the evaluation, so they're by no means immune, and they definitely have a presence as well as far as emmer goes. But we haven't done a thorough evaluation of fusarium presence in these whole wheats compared to modern and heritage bred wheat.
Okay, great. I just posted what I think is the link to the National Small Grains Lab in Aberdeen, Idaho, which I think is the resource that was discussed because a couple of people were interested in finding out more about that. Okay, let's see. What were the highest levels of iron and zinc in einkorn?
I think I have some of the data on zinc, iron and zinc. 53 to 54 grams per kilogram of zinc. Selenium, there is a wide range in micrograms per kilogram between 200 to 270 micrograms per kilogram, and zinc and iron is close to between 40 and 50 grams per kilogram.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Do you have any information on the feasibility of hand processing with the lower yields for ancient varieties like emmer, einkorn, and spelt?
Hand processing?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well,
No.
to me, hand processing is, I would like to translate it into a cottage industry, and the examples are, the living examples are those in Tuscany, in Garfagnano region of Italy, and they developed small-scale dehullers and processing of emmer in particular, their farro, and it is a very thriving industry. Everything is available on the internet, and you can see their equipment and even small fields and how they harvest and process everything.
Okay, this person has heard that some spelt has been crossed with wheat to get something more desirable to industrial bakers. Can someone comment on this?
I am not...
Yeah, I can say Maverick is one variety that has modern wheat genes bred into it. It's a variety of spelt. Just want to throw that out there, but I don't know a whole lot about that history.
Well, bred wheat is one of the parents of spelt, so it has its own, almost 50% of its genes coming from bred wheat.
Okay, let's see. Can anyone comment on the winter hardiness of the different hulled wheats and their abilities to compete with weeds?
The best winter hardy germplasm came from Switzerland, especially spelt. This is what I'm familiar with.
Okay. What about...
This is Lisa. Again, on that cultivar testing page, we do have winter hardiness from the last 3 years, and that does include last winter, which was a really hard winter. So it shows winter survival measures for various wheats and ancient wheats that the whole species that we tested. So you can take a look at that.
Okay, here's someone that says he bred his own gene pool of einkorn from seed he collected in Europe and the Mideast and has 10 tons from last summer and much more coming. So this person's name is Eli Ragosa, but he wants folks to contact him about a farmer and marketing cooperative. So I guess...
May I just correct, Eli is a lady.
Okay.
Yeah, and
she's in my sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll just type the link in the chat box for anybody who's interested in learning more about that. Okay. And then I think we really only have time for one more question here, and that is, besides the vomitoxin presence, how did the wheat researchers narrow the varieties down to 7?
That was a combination of wanting to get a good representation of the different classes and agronomic like protein contents, and also the quantity of seed that we had available, because one of the challenges in doing sensory evaluation and bread making evaluation is you need to have quite a bit of grain, so small scale trials often don't give you the quantity that you need. So it needed to have good performance across all the sites that we wanted to use to blend, and also we tried to select a representative sample of the different wheat types we had available.
Okay, well, we are running out of time, so I'd like to thank everyone for entering in questions and say once again that you can find this and our many other upcoming and archived webinars on organic farming and research topics at the link on your screen. Thank you so much, Julie, Lisa, and Abdullah, for sharing your research with us today, and thanks to everyone for joining us.